It was a quiet evening on a stretch of highway just outside of town. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving only streaks of orange and purple across the sky. Traffic was moving steadily, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Suddenly, a scream of metal and the hiss of steam filled the air as a sedan swerved to the side of the road. Within seconds, smoke began pouring from under the hood, quickly followed by the terrifying flicker of flames. Inside the car sat a woman in her 30s, dazed from the impact of hitting the guardrail. She tried to push the door open, but it was jammed from the collision. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her seatbelt, panic setting in as the smoke thickened. Cars continued to pass by, drivers slowing for a moment, then accelerating, unsure of what to do, or too afraid to stop. Then, out of the stream of vehicles, one pickup truck screeched to a halt. A man in his 40s jumped out, leaving his hazard lights flashing. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the burning sedan. The woman could hear his voice through the smoke, calm, steady, commanding her to stay still. With brute force, he yanked at the jammed door until it finally gave way. Reaching inside, he unbuckled her seatbelt and pulled her out, cradling her as she stumbled away from the vehicle. Just moments after they reached the shoulder, the flames erupted, engulfing the car in a roar of fire. The woman collapsed onto the ground, coughing and shaking, tears streaming down her face. She turned to thank the man who had saved her life, but he was already walking back to his truck. "Wait," she cried, her voice breaking. "What's your name?" He only gave a small wave over his shoulder. "Doesn't matter. You're safe now." And with that, he climbed into his pickup, pulled back onto the highway, and disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but the sound of his engine fading into the distance. To this day, the woman tells her story with gratitude and awe. She never learned who her rescuer was, but in her heart, she calls him her everyday angel, a reminder that true heroes often ask for nothing in return. In a worn-down neighborhood where hope often felt like a luxury, a small public school stood as a beacon for hundreds of children. The classrooms were overcrowded, the walls peeling, and the budget so tight that even basic supplies were scarce. For many kids, home life was no easier, families struggling with poverty, broken households, and the daily pressure of simply surviving. Amid these challenges stood Mrs. Carter, a middle-aged teacher with kind eyes and an unshakable spirit. She had been teaching for over 20 years, but her passion for her students had never dimmed. When she noticed a child without notebooks or pencils, she didn't send them away embarrassed. She reached into her own bag and handed them the tools they needed. What her paycheck couldn't cover, she bought anyway, believing no child should be denied the chance to learn. But it wasn't just the supplies. Mrs. Carter gave something more valuable, her time. While most teachers left after the final bell, she stayed behind, tutoring struggling students, listening to their worries, and reminding them they were capable of far more than the world had told them. She became more than a teacher, she was a mentor, a counselor, and for many, the only adult who consistently believed in them. One student, Jason, was on the verge of dropping out. His grades had slipped, and with no encouragement at home, he felt destined to fail. But Mrs. Carter saw the potential in him. She spent hours after school working with him, praising his progress, and setting small goals he could achieve. Slowly, Jason began to believe in himself. Years later, he graduated with honors, often saying, "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for her." Mrs. Carter never sought recognition. She didn't see herself as a hero, just a teacher doing her job. But to her students, she was far more. She was proof that even in the toughest circumstances, compassion and persistence could change lives. Her legacy lives not in awards or headlines but in the countless young people who carry her lessons into adulthood. To them, Mrs. Carter will always be their everyday angel, a reminder that sometimes, the smallest acts of faith and kindness can rewrite a child's future. When the hurricane struck, the small coastal town was swallowed in chaos. Winds howled like freight trains, tearing roofs from homes, while rain poured in relentless sheets. By nightfall, entire streets were rivers, cars floated like toys, and families huddled in attics praying the rising water wouldn't reach them. Sirens wailed in the distance, but first responders were stretched thin. Many feared they would not make it through the night. In the middle of the storm, one man, Daniel Lopez, refused to stand by. A lifelong fisherman, Daniel knew the waters well. His small wooden fishing boat, usually used for casting nets at dawn, became his lifeline to the community. With nothing more than a flashlight, a rope, and his sheer determination, he launched into the flooded streets. For hours, he battled the currents, navigating between power lines, floating debris, and half-submerged cars. At one house, he heard children crying from a second-floor window. He rode against the surge, called out to calm them, and ferried the terrified family to higher ground. At another, an elderly couple sat stranded on their porch, clutching each other as the water rose. Daniel lifted them into his boat, promising they would be safe. Again and again, he returned, guiding his boat into the darkest corners of the neighborhood, shouting into the storm to find those still trapped. Some rescues were quick, others took dangerous effort, but Daniel never stopped. By dawn, he had carried dozens of neighbors, strangers, and even pets to safety. Exhausted and soaked to the bone, he kept going until the last call for help was answered. When the storm finally passed, people spoke of Daniel with awe. Reporters wanted his story, neighbors called him a hero, and children pointed to him with wide eyes full of gratitude. But when asked about his bravery, Daniel only shrugged. "I just did what anyone should do," he said softly, looking out over the battered town. To his community, however, Daniel was far more than a fisherman. He was living proof that even in the darkest storms, ordinary people can rise to extraordinary courage. To those he saved, he wasn't just a neighbor, he was their everyday angel. In a struggling town where jobs were scarce and families barely making ends meet, the local homeless shelter was more than just a building, it was a lifeline. Every night, dozens of men, women, and children found food, warmth, and safety within its walls. But like so many nonprofits, the shelter constantly battled financial hardship. Bills piled up, donations dwindled, and there were nights when the staff feared they would have to close the doors for good. Then, one winter evening, something remarkable happened. In the shelter's mailbox, they discovered an unmarked envelope. Inside was cash, enough to cover their overdue utility bills. No note, no name, just hope tucked between folded bills. The staff were stunned, grateful, but also puzzled. Who would do such a thing? Weeks later, when the shelter again faced a crisis, another envelope appeared. Then another. Always at the very moment they needed it most, the mysterious donor stepped in, quietly keeping the shelter alive. Over the years, the pattern continued. Whenever the lights threatened to go out or the pantry shelves ran bare, another envelope would arrive. The staff began calling their unseen helper the silent angel. Rumors spread through town. Some believed it was a wealthy businessman, others thought it might be a church group. No one could be sure. The only certainty was that without those envelopes, the shelter would not have survived. Years passed before the truth finally came out. The donor wasn't a millionaire, nor a powerful figure, it was Mr. Harris, the owner of a small corner shop. He had lived humbly, running his store for decades, never seeking attention. When asked why he had given so much without recognition, his answer was simple. "I saw people struggling, and I had a little to give. It wasn't about me, it was about them." The town was stunned. The man they had walked past countless times had been their quiet guardian all along. To the shelter, and to the many lives saved through his generosity, Mr. Harris was more than a shopkeeper. He was proof that true angels don't need wings or fame, they just need compassion. And sometimes, the quietest acts of kindness echo the loudest. The school bus rattled down the narrow road, filled with chatter, laughter, and the usual noise of students heading home. In the middle row sat a younger boy, barely 12, clutching his backpack tightly. He was quiet, hoping to go unnoticed. But that day, he didn't. A bigger student, known for picking on others, towered over him. The bully shoved the boy against the window, mocking his clothes and grabbing his backpack while other kids watched in silence. Some laughed nervously, others looked away, pretending not to see. For the boy, every second felt like an eternity. Then, from a few rows back, a teenager named Alex stood up. He wasn't the strongest kid on the bus, nor was he particularly popular, but something inside him refused to stay silent. With his heart pounding, he walked toward the bully and placed himself between him and the younger boy. "Leave him alone," Alex said firmly, his voice shaking but determined. The bus went quiet. The bully sneered, stepping closer, and for a moment it looked like Alex might get hurt. But he didn't move. He held his ground, shielding the boy who couldn't defend himself. After a tense pause, the bully muttered something under his breath and backed away, slamming into a seat. The bus slowly filled with whispers, but the moment had already made its mark. The younger boy looked up at Alex with wide, tearful eyes. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Alex just smiled and sat beside him, as if it were the most natural thing to do. Word of the incident spread quickly through the school. What mattered wasn't just that Alex had stopped the bully, it was that he showed everyone that standing up for what's right is possible, even when it's scary. Slowly, others found the courage to speak out. Students began reporting bullying, supporting classmates who were targeted, and refusing to let cruelty go unchecked. Alex never considered himself a hero. To him, it was a simple choice: protect someone who needed help. But to that younger boy, and to the students who followed his example, Alex became a symbol of courage. He was their everyday angel, proving that one brave voice can change the silence of many.